Karl Marx once explained that without organization, the working class is nothing but raw material for exploitation. Immigrants have always been the least organized and most exploited layers of the working class. In the last few days, they've taken the center stage in the news as protests have been taking place in LA and other major American cities, as the Trump administration has stepped up its deportation and raids on illegal immigrant communities. Today, in today's show, we will be discussing this topic, the events that have been taking place in the US, as well as the question of immigration in general. And finally, we're going to be discussing the conflict between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. My name is Hamid Alizadeh, and I'm here once again with Jorge Martin. Welcome back, Jorge.
Pleasure to be here.
It's kind of exploded in the US, hasn't it?
Yes. In the last few days, since Saturday, basically, we've had a massive movement of resistance against these ICE raids. Mm-hmm. And I think it's quite a significant development. We should discuss it.
We've seen in LA, there's been protests for 6 days now because ICE has ramped up its raids on immigrant communities, targeting layers that hadn't been targeted before. As far as I understand, it's primarily been the ICE raids have been primarily targeting
workplaces.
But no, before this has been I've been trying. I mean, it's more criminal elements and so on, more lumpen elements. But now they've been targeting workplaces, ordinary working class people who who cause no harm to anyone. And this has really brought things cooking in the US. There's been protests in LA, in New York, San Antonio, Seattle, Minneapolis, other places, I'm sure. This is just my latest information. Now, why don't we start by what's happening? You've been kind of following the situation.
On Saturday, what happened was that all of a sudden, federal agents, not just from ICE, but also the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, heavily armed and in a very demonstrative manner, they arrived in Los Angeles and started carrying out raids on workplaces, immigrant communities, and basically snatching people, checking the immigration status, and arresting quite a lot of them. So the initial stage of this movement was when people started to go to a federal building where the immigrants had been arrested, were being detained, and trying to get them released. And then there were clashes with federal agents, and they've been they've been doing quite a lot of things which are illegal. These people have been arrested without an actual warrant.
Yes.
People have been,
in fact, openly.
Yes.
You can say we don't even care about warrants or legality. Just do what's necessary.
And in a very violent and demonstrative manner. I mean, there's been images of a woman with a little child, and the child's taken away from her. She's being bundled into the back of a police van. Many of these Asians go around in unmarked cars. You don't know whether they're ICE or not. They don't identify themselves. The aim is not just to detain people and deport them in an expedite manner, but also to strike fear and terror in the immigrant communities, to do it in a very demonstrative manner. And this is what led to this big uprising. People started protesting, people started resisting, and people started fighting back. That's the important thing of what's been happening in Los Angeles in the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was reading Reuters, which was saying that Trump has been pushing for immigration to be ramped up, but ICE had trouble getting above the certain limit. Had a problem getting above what Biden was deporting.
The numbers of
Biden, which we'll get back to on the question of the Democrats. But clearly, you have here a Trump administration, a few months in, coming in with a big fanfare, big hoo-ha, not really delivering on any of his promises. He promised a war in Ukraine within 24 hours or 48 hours.
Solved, yeah.
That's not happened. He promised peace in Gaza. That's definitely not happened. He promised to rein back inflation, which is probably the biggest and most important promise he made. It's not happened. In fact, the U.S. economy is tanking. Is grinding to a halt or slowing down.
It's had all these problems with the tariff policies.
The tariffs have completely backfired, and in fact, he hasn't even managed to push them through. He was talking about a massive tariff regime, but most things he had to step back from. And even immigration, which, in his world would be an easy win, he didn't manage to supersede Biden's figure. That says a lot about Biden, by the way, as well. Yes. Biden was deported the record amount. In American history, no one deported as many people as Biden did. But it's clear that he is trying to appear strong. He's trying to appear decisive and strong, carrying out his promises. And also, in a time where dissatisfaction with his administration must be on the rise in the US, he's trying to divert the attention and polarize the question along non-class lines.
Yes, and he's also trying to present this image that the Democrats are in favor of crime.
Yes.
That because there's been this protest and this fight back against immigration raids, then he's decided to send the National Guard. This is the first time since 1965, I think, that the National Guard has been sent by the president into a state against the wishes of the state's governor, in this case Newsom, a Democrat, who said that he doesn't want the National Guard there. Not only the National Guard, I think it's 2,000 troops. Someone was saying the other day that there are now more U.S. troops in California than there are in Iraq and Syria to put together. So anyway, he sent the National Guard troops on the streets to enforce these immigration raids. And now he's also sent the Marines. I think it's about 700 Marines from Camp Pendleton have been deployed on the streets of Los Angeles. So it's not, he's trying to achieve several aims. One, to divert attention from the other failings of his policies. Number two, to strike fear into the immigrant communities and divide the working class along immigrant, non-immigrant, or rather amongst between undocumented and documented workers. But there's also a racial element to this, obviously, because he's now attacking mainly Latino workers. But also there's been raids on Chinese communities and so on. So anyway, he's trying to divide the working class. And finally, he's trying to present this image that the Democrats are in favor of chaos, violence, insurrection he's talking about. So there's a political motivation as well as other motivations behind this.
California's governor, Gavin Newsom, he's a potential presidential candidate for next time around. He's been out calling Trump an authoritarian and denouncing the sending of troops to California. But it rings a little bit hollow.
Yes, it's all a bit of a theater because then Trump has said, "Okay, I'm going to arrest Newsom," and Newsom has said, "Okay, come and arrest me." And it's a very choreographed confrontation. The mayor of Los Angeles, Bass, she's also come out and said, we're in favor of democracy, we're a sanctuary city, and so on. But as a matter of fact, in practice, most of the repression, I was talking to comrades in California the other day, and most of the repression has been carried out not by the National Guard, which also participated, but mainly by the Los Angeles Police Department, the LAPD, which is a hated police force, racist police force using brutality and violence against minorities and immigrant communities and so on. They've been the ones mainly deployed in order to enforce this by using they call it less lethal weapons, rubber bullets, tear gas. They even had a sonic weapon, which they didn't use, but they took it out just for intimidation. And so it's mainly the Democrats or police forces, the sheriffs also been involved, police forces under the command of the Democrats, in this case, the Democratic mayor of Los Angeles. They've been carrying out most of the repression or fully participating in the repression. The mayor of Los Angeles has declared a curfew now for, I think, 2 nights running. So basically, you don't have the right to be out on the streets. You don't have the right to assemble or protest or demonstrate. So yeah, they criticize Trump and they say, oh, we don't want the National Guard. Well, in practice, what they're saying is we can deal with these protesters with our own police. Our repression is better than Trump's repression. So yeah, it's completely cynical. Never mind the fact that you just mentioned that Biden, in the same space of time, deported more migrants than what Trump has done. That doesn't make Trump better on migration, but it certainly makes Biden worse than Trump.
In fact, Obama, Trump, and Biden each broke the record for deportations every year.
Yes.
Our comrades, you mentioned our comrades. Our comrades have participated. Just for anyone who wants to read, we have an article on Marxist.com.
Yeah, which has been written by the comrades in Los Angeles, the Revolutionary Communists of America in LA.
Very, very good article. And we also appeared in Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
They interviewed one of our comrades, although they really distorted what she was saying and made it to be much more
like a personal
story. Whereas she said, no, I'm here because I'm a communist and a revolutionary. What about the movement? You know, this is a struggle for survival for hundreds of thousands of people who are now under threat, living in a state of terror and fear. There's been tens of thousands of people coming out. What is the state of the movement?
I mean, the people are obviously afraid. These raids, they strike in a surprising manner without prior warning, as I said before, without a warrant or anything, without any legal recourse. You're not going to be taken to a court. In fact, the original arrest took place when people turned up at immigration appointments for the dealing with of the documents and stuff like that, and then they were immediately arrested. So the intention is to strike fear. There are reports in, this is a heavily immigrant region, the whole of the California state, but also Los Angeles. So I saw a report, people are afraid, they're not turning up at work, they're not turning up, they're not bringing the kids to school because they fear there'll be a raid outside the school. There was even a report about graduation day in some high school, and some parents didn't go because they were afraid that there will be an immigration raid outside. There's been immigration raids in churches, in hospitals. So yeah, the intention is to intimidate. But the interesting thing about Saturday and Sunday is that these communities were organized themselves. People came out on the streets. They put pressure on the federal agents. There was, as we saw, the arrest of David Huerta, who was the president of the SEIU, the biggest union in California with 700,000 members. He was just observing and documenting federal agents carrying out these raids. He was pushed on the floor, beaten up, arrested, and held for 2 or 3 days. So people have been resisting. This is the important thing. The brutal intervention, shock intervention of federal immigration agents has provoked a reaction on the part of the communities. There has been the organization of community neighborhood patrols. People are watching out for each other. They're coming out in numbers, so it's more difficult for people to be arrested. I think they have snatched about, I can't remember the figures, but few dozen people have been snatched back from federal agents, released from custody, and so on. So I think that this is very important. The power, the strength of the working class is able to fight back, but only if there is certain degree of organization. The main problem with these protests, which were big on Sunday, about 10,000 people came out on Sunday, blocked the main freeway. The main problem is that this has been very spontaneous. There's no leadership. It's mainly young people are at the forefront of this movement, mainly from the immigrant communities. you could say that some of the methods that we have seen used in revolutionary uprisings in Latin America in recent times, in Chile in 2019, in Ecuador, in Colombia during the national strike, they're now being used, to defend people defending themselves from the police, from forces of repression. But the main problem is that the movement is still very spontaneous. It lacks leadership, coordination, organization. It could be much stronger. I will also say that the unions have taken a passive approach to this, even though this David Huerta, who's the president of the SCIU,
700,000 strong
union, he was arrested. And yeah, the SCIU issued a statement saying we're going to mobilize, but they didn't really use the industrial muscle that they have. Never mind calling strikes, or they didn't even mobilize the membership to proper demonstrations, pickets and stuff like that. So
yes, this is the really striking thing, because I was reading some of the reports from our comrades in the US who was saying that the protests are more or less leaderless, and more or less anyone can go up and take the lead.
Yeah.
In a country which does have unions, does have strong unions, and this is an important part of the working. This is a significant part of the working class. Literally the working class, i.e. the workers, the undocumented workers, who are under fierce attack. And no one has really taken any action besides some statements and moralistic outbursts, or even called out what this really represents, which is it's not just an attack on the undocumented immigrants. It's an attack on the whole working class.
Yes.
Because it undermines the position of the working class as a whole. So the question is, what is our program? What is a program that the movement needs in order to succeed? At the moment, it's kind of like a desperate struggle against repression. But in reality, what the unions need to explain is that, look, these people, the undocumented immigrants, are, and we get back to this in the next segment, but they form a significant part of the workforce. And they're an important way for the bosses to keep wages down for the working class as a whole. This idea that they're stealing jobs and that's in reality is the bosses that's using the precarious nature of these people to undermine the wages and the conditions of the whole of the working class.
Yes.
The real target is the whole working class, not just these guys. So surely the first demand would be legalization and an organization.
That's right.
But no one is raising these things. Another thing I was thinking is most of the major unions are, although that's starting to change, but they've been backing the Democrats. A big part of the American working class rebelled against the Democrats. They hate the Democrats because they see them as a representative of the rich, of big business, of everything that's wrong with their lives, of the ones who are carrying, who's squeezing their lives every single day. And the union leaders, as far as I understand, this person, David Huerta, has participated in.
He is a Democrat.
He's a Democrat, right? So they completely discredit themselves.
Of course.
Therefore, obviously, at the same time, probably the first statement,
particularly in a place like California, the Democrats are the establishment party. They control the governor, the mayor, the LAPD.
For decades.
They also have the support of the Hollywood stars. They're all Democrats and so on. And so this means that even in California, where the Democrats won the election, but nevertheless, a large layer of people, even from Latino community and so on, they voted for Trump as a protest vote.
Exactly. And so therefore, surely the first demand should be no trust in the Democrats, no trust in the liberals for an independent working class position. Obviously, no trust in Trump. He's the one attacking them.
Yes.
But no trust in the Democrats. Only the working class on its own, leaning on its own powers and its own organization and its own solidarity can carry this struggle forward. That's the number one way of guaranteeing the solidarity and sympathy of the part of the working class who are under the influence of people like Donald
In
Trump.
fact, if you think about it, the Biden administration was the one that legislated the railway workers against the strike and carried out a number of attacks on trade unions. So yeah, this is very very important. The question is that let's say there are two different positions of the ruling class. One, which is the dominant position, the ruling class is interested in there being undocumented workers who have no legal rights, because that way they can be exploited much more than workers who have legal rights. And that, as you say, brings down the wages, is a weapon to bring down the wages of all workers. And there's another section of the ruling class that's using cynically the question of migration. And they say, no, the problems of the working class, it's not the ruling class, it's not the bosses.
Yeah.
It's these guys who come here and steal your jobs.
Yeah.
So is the two sides of the migration issue are at play in this question. Because the Democrats, they pretend to be, they say, no, we are... we defend these sanctuary cities. This comes, I think, from the 2012 movement. In 2012, in the United States, there was a big migrant rights movement. There was even one day where they said a day without migrants. On May Day, there was like an attempt at a general strike of migrant workers in order to show the role they play in the U.S. economy. And at that time, many people got organized. There were mass demonstrations, and some of those networks continue. And the Democrats, as they are, it's the cynical side of the U.S. Ruling class. They pretend to be the friends of the workers, the friends of the people, and they say, "Oh no, there's not going to be immigration raids here." But then, in practice, as we've just said, Biden was carrying out more deportations than Trump in his first mandate, and then Trump in this mandate.
Just to interject, sorry about that. But there was this Obama aide who, during Trump's presidency in 2018, when Trump, there was talk about the children in cages that Trump was putting in. He tweeted these pictures of children in cages, only to realize that they were from the Obama era.
Yes.
So it's just the liberals.
Yes.
If Trump does it with pride, the liberals do it with, try to cover over it, whereas in reality they're carrying out the same policies.
Yes. So this is the situation, particularly in places like. I was saying that some of these networks were organized at that time in 2012, and around that time is when the Democrats came up with this idea of sanctuary cities. There's not going to be any actions against undocumented migrants here, but nevertheless, the governor of California has just cut some 8 programs for undocumented migrants. For instance. Education, English lessons and stuff like that. So basically, they pretend, but they're just very cynical. And Trump is more brutal because he wants to use this appearance of being tough and sending people to a jail in El Salvador or whatever, because that also plays into the idea that he wants to project, that undocumented migrants are basically, all of them are violent criminals and stuff like that.
The enemy within.
Yeah.
There's one last point we should deal with before
the enemy within. You just said. I've just seen was it the Department of Homeland Security or ICE? They just tweeted some image in which they says basically is a cartoon of Uncle Sam. And it says, we need you to fight against these invaders. They're basically calling them invaders,
There's one last point before we continue.
Yeah.
The National Guard has been called in. Special Forces, Army Special Forces have been called in. There's an idea in some of the bourgeois, especially the liberal papers, that authoritarianism. Newsom called Trump an authoritarian, and there's this idea that this is a power grab and a dictatorship developing in the U.S. But as you were saying, the main violence actually is being carried out, at least in
LAPD.
By the LAPD. Yeah. We were talking about before in the European Union, you have the
The European Union's immigration policies, and these are all liberal democracies, right? Is really violent, brutal, and horrible. Italy, for instance, people say, Trump is sending migrants to a jail that he's contracted out in El Salvador through Bukele, and that's really bad. You know, there's people who've been snatched, sent without any checks, and some people who, I mean, never mind the fact that being undocumented is not a criminal offense, is a civil offense, so you shouldn't be put in jail or anything for that. But some people have been sent that are US citizens, people who have legal papers and so on. But in Italy, the Italian government has done exactly the same thing by contracting out detention camps in Albania, which in the end didn't work, I think. But the European Union is also paying Libya to have basically detention camps, concentration camps where conditions are brutal, people are tortured, attacked, and so on in Libya. And they did the same thing a few years back with Turkey. So the European Union is paying Turkey millions of euros so that Turkey keeps and detains these migrants before they reach the borders of Europe. Sometimes when they attempt to reach the borders of Europe, the boats are sunk by coast guards and Frontex, and it's a really
Countless
brutal
people dying
policy.
every year, and they make it unbearable.
It's not fundamentally different from Trump. Perhaps Trump is more demonstrative in his ways that he is using, but fundamentally the policy is the same.
Yes,
and with the same aims.
Yes.
Oh, and I wanted to say, you just mentioned the National Guard. This is interesting because the National Guard soldiers, right? They've taken an oath to defend the Constitution and the people of the United States. And in California, the National Guard is mostly Black people and Latino people. Obviously, there's a composition of the population, and people who join the National Guard are the poorest sections of society. They may be looking for a job that gives them health insurance and so on. And it's going to be
sent against their brothers and sisters.
That's right. It's going to be difficult to use them against their own communities. In fact, there's an organization in LA called Unión del Barrio. It's like a neighborhood organization, and they have made an appeal to the Latino National Guard troops not to allow themselves to be used against their own people. And there are many discussions going on. In the article by the U.S. Congress, this is explained. Yeah. There are many discussions going on amongst National Guard troops about whether this is right, whether this is wrong, being sent against civilians in the United States. And so that is quite interesting process of the consciousness. And if there was a serious revolutionary party, they will make a serious appeal to the ranks of the National Guard. There could be
yes, because at the moment also a lot of this, if this happens, a lot of this will be diverted down a democratic pathway, i.e. the Democrats' pathway. Yes. Whereas what we need is to actually build an alternative, a real working class alternative, which can attract these layers that move into opposition, in one direction or the other. Let's continue, because this question of immigration, I've actually been wanting to do a show about immigration for a while, because this is now one of the most prominent political questions in the Western world, and probably in other countries as well. It's become a key issue in the US elections. It's a key issue in every election in Europe. And I think there's a lot of confusion about this. On the one hand, you have these populist movements like Trump, Farage, Le Pen, and so on, coming up, talking about how immigrants are undermining our society, leeching and being parasites, leeching off of our benefits and welfare and so on. And on the other hand, you have the liberal argument, which is a moralistic, we should be good to immigrants. And a growing layer of working class people, or let's say the populace, are finding an echo amongst a growing layer of working class people. And I think if you don't explain why this is happening, if you don't understand why this is happening, the only answer you can have is that they're all racist and backward and reactionary. Whereas it's true, there's a lot of racist and reactionary supporting these guys. I mean, Trump and so on, they have layers of petty bourgeois, middle class, lumpener. They are definitely reactionary. But for a lot of working class people...
Well, that doesn't explain why these ideas are growing at this particular time.
Precisely. Why weren't they growing 50 years ago?
Yeah.
When life was a lot better for ordinary people. I think that maybe give you a hint. But the three kind of arguments that come up in all the polls that discuss immigrations. One is, I talk to a lot of working class people. I remember when I was an apprentice in a factory many years ago, I had this guy who was it was in Denmark, and he was a member of the Danish People's Party, which is kind of like a Farage type of organization. And he was saying, look, Hamid, there's just not enough resources. We can't accept so many at once. We need to slow it down. This was his thing. And to me, I mean, when I was discussing what are the resources that he's talking about? He's talking about the healthcare system, the education system, the welfare system, the social system. Well, that is where he feels the squeeze. That is where he feels the pressure. That is the explanation. It's not that he's just making it up. It's coming from somewhere. It has a basis in something. The second one is they're taking our jobs. But again, surely that is a sign of the pressures on the job market, where we know that exploitation has dramatically increased. The pressure at workplaces have dramatically gone up, and whereas wages have stagnated in most of the Western countries. And here you have a group of people who are brought in as extremely cheap laborers, not organized, without any kind of rights, and just squeezed and pushed and bullied into doing any work for more or less, the lowest possible price that you can imagine, just so they can survive. But surely that's a real grievance from working class people, that they are feeling the squeeze, that they have had it up to here. And then the last thing is the question of crime. And Fred, who is also a regular on this show, he was saying an interesting anecdote from Italian TV. There was a liberal academic who said, look, all statistics show that crime actually is no more in immigrant communities. In fact, in the US, undocumented immigrants consistently, in research, study after study, it's been shown that they commit half the crime the documented people, because they're afraid of being sent back.
Of course.
But there is a real, genuine feeling of insecurity, that things are falling apart, that society is not functioning, that something is there's a deep malaise, something is deeply wrong. And obviously, then you can point your finger at these guys.
A scapegoat, yeah.
Convenient scapegoats. And the question is, why can they succeed? Why can demagogues like Trump and Farage why can they succeed?
Because no one else is offering an alternative to these real problems that do exist. The crumbling down of the welfare state, the cuts in education. When Farage says, people can't get a doctor's appointment in this country, and that is actually true.
It's true.
He's not wrong.
He's wrong. Been to the doctor for 4 years.
He's wrong. He's wrong in saying that this is the fault of immigrants. But he's not wrong in saying that you cannot get a doctor's appointment. So, and no one is answering that question, right? Or the liberals are saying, oh, we should immigrants are welcome here, and from a moral point of view, right? And obviously there is a basic human solidarity sometimes that you can appeal to, but you need to deal with this question from a class point of view, or otherwise you will not be able to cut across this right-wing demagogy.
The question is, where are the unions? Where are the working class organizations? Where are the working class parties? In Scandinavia, there's always discussion about integration. You know, you're not well integrated enough, and you're never well integrated enough, basically. And even if you are, then you're hiding your truly extremist ideas. They actually say that.
Yes.
But one of the comrades some years ago actually made a very, very insightful comment. He said, integration into what? Because immigrants are integrated into capitalism, into class society, as a part of a working class, the heavily exploited part of the working class. But they're not integrated into the workers' movement. If anyone should be looking at integrating them, it should be the unions.
Of course.
But unfortunately, in most countries, the unions, because they refuse to take up a militant position, a class position, they justify their own bankruptcy by using the immigrants, just like the right wing is doing.
Yes.
So, yes, the bourgeois is calling the immigrants making the immigrants the scapegoats, and even your union leaders are making the immigrants the scapegoat. And so, obviously, for most working class people who, at this stage, are not in struggle, are not thinking deeply about the class struggle and their interests as working class people, that becomes a natural kind of thing to follow. There's no other alternative.
But I will say this is not a new problem, right? This question of immigration is existed ever since capitalism has existed, and already Marx and Engels had to deal with it, and Lenin had to deal with it. And we have an article by Nicholas on the website, which is this question of border controls and so on. And he has a very good quote in there, which is from the Communist International, the fourth Congress of the Third International, the Communist International in 1922. They passed a resolution on the question of, it's called the Eastern Thesis, right? So it deals with a number of questions. There's the threat of war that's coming up at that time. And I'll read bits of it because I think it's very interesting. It's exactly the right class-based approach to deal with these questions. And it basically says, the communist parties of the imperialist countries, the United States, Japan, Britain, Australia, and Canada, are obliged not to limit themselves to propaganda against the war, but also to make, and this is the important point, to make every effort to eliminate the factors that disorganize the workers' movement in these countries and make it easier for capitalists to utilize national and race antagonisms. And then it says, these factors are the questions of immigration and cheap immigrant labor. That's what it says. And how do you deal with these questions? It says basically because immigrant workers are recruited into the sugar plantations through the contract system. This fact has led workers in the imperialist countries to demand the passing of laws against immigration and against migrant laborers, both in the United States and in Australia. These laws serve to deepen the antagonism between immigrant and white workers, fragmenting and weakening the unity of the workers' movement. This is the important point. What's the impact of immigration from the point of view of the working class, necessary working class unity? And then it says, what's the answer? It says the communist parties of the United States, Canada, and Australia, in the imperialist countries, must wage a vigorous campaign against laws that restrict immigration, and explain that the proletarian masses of these countries, that they will too suffer harm because of the race hatred stirred up by these laws. So basically saying these laws serve to divide the workers along national lines, migrant versus native, undocumented versus legal, and so on. And it says, the capitalists oppose such anti-immigration laws. I will say some capitalists, because the capitalists are divided on this question, some capitalists oppose anti-immigration laws because they are in favor of the free importation of cheap migrant labor as a means of driving down the wages of white workers, he says. And this is true. But then the answer, this is the most important part of this resolution, I will say. The answer is there is only one way to successfully counter the capitalists' intention to go over to the offensive. And the answer is this. The immigrant workers must be admitted into the existing trade unions At the same time, the demand must be raised that the wages of migrant workers be brought up to the same level as the white workers pay. Through such a step, the communist parties will expose the capitalists' intentions and also demonstrate clearly to the migrant workers that the international proletariat does not harbor any racial prejudice.
Yeah.
This is a class-based approach to the question of immigration. How do you deal with this question? How do you deal with the divisive impact of this question in the workers' movement? It's been used by both people like Trump, people like Biden, and so on. How you do it? By the unity of the working class. Workers must all be organized in the same unions. The unions must fight for all workers to have legal and trade union rights and protections, and they should fight for a general increase in the conditions and pay of all workers to be brought up, so that the migrant workers are not used in order to undermine the wages of legal or native workers. If you take just a moralistic approach instead of a class approach, you will not solve the question. You will make it worse. You will contribute to the division of the working class on opposite camps.
Because what is it that some working class people hear? We need to exploit you. We need to squeeze you. We need to crush you because we like migrants. That is what they hear, right? And that's what we have to fight. It reminds me of something that Spinoza, he was talking about religion and how the kings, the monarchy uses religion. And he says, it makes you fight for your king as if you were fighting for your own deliverance.
Yes.
And that is precisely what racism does. It makes you fight for your master, for your slave master, as if you were fighting for your own freedom. And that is what you need. But the point is, you need to understand how to do this. This is my pet peeve. We need to understand how to talk to ordinary working class people, not in a moralistic, arrogant, lecturing tone. Can't you understand that you're racist? But actually by explaining our position and addressing their concerns. What are the concerns that people have? It's wages, living standards. That's the number one concern of working class people. Well, we need to explain how this is being used to undermine their wages. We also need to explain the question of imperialism. Exactly. That's something we haven't dealt with. Where does this immigration come from? I mean, I'm a refugee as I was a child, but formerly a refugee. No one wants to do that. I'll tell you this: my mother did not want to leave her country because it took her 10 years to settle in a new country. But it was because of imperialism and imperialist meddling, which is, first of all, there's wars in Africa and the Middle East, but also the economic exploitation of the poor countries. Every year, it's estimated that $3 trillion are transferred from the poor countries to the rich. That is the basis of immigration. Now we have this debt servicing thing that we talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. Debt interest rate payments from poor countries now is higher than the amount of money that they receive from in any form of aid and so on.
Investment.
So there's a giant exploitation, a crushing domination of American and Western imperialism over the rest of the world, over most of the world, which means what? Which is undermines living standards, undermines any livelihood. Ordinary people just want to have a stable life, just want to eat, drink, be with their families. That's what most of the people on this planet want. And they can't have that because of the capitalists and in particular because of the imperialists.
This is very clear in the case of the United States because in the United States in 1994, they signed the free trade agreement of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the immediate impact of this was it destroyed the Mexican economy, including Mexican agriculture, because U.S. agriculture is capitalist agriculture, heavily mechanized, heavily subsidized, and they use methods that are much more productive. So the signing of this free trade agreement basically destroyed Mexican agriculture and led forced many people in the countryside in rural communities in Mexico to emigrate. Not only to emigrate, also that was a contributing factor to the rise of the drug cartels and the gangs, because people had no other means of earning a living, but millions emigrated to the United States in search of jobs. The destruction of the economies of Central America, the destruction of Central American countries through the dirty war against the guerrillas, the overthrow of governments and so on. That's the material basis that forces people to uproot themselves, leave their countries and their families, try to find a future somewhere else.
Yeah. The fact that the desperate condition in the US is more attractive with all the dangers that it implies than the life they come from, that should tell us something about what conditions imperialism has created.
In fact, I was looking at some figures, and it says that the rate of immigration into the United States has slowed down, or even in some cases been slightly reversed since the 2008 crisis. Because obviously there's an economic crisis in the United States, there's less jobs, and there's been a little bit of a economic recovery in Mexico, for instance, so people decided to go back. And
although during the last Biden year, that reversed again.
Yes.
Why? Because of the pile of debt that was piling up in these countries, because of the economic crisis. Another point is that union leaders should be explaining patiently and in a friendly manner to the workers is the real role of immigration. As you said before, big business has no interest in actually turning off immigration.
No.
In the US, immigrant labor, according to some studies, account for $2.2 trillion of GDP. That's around 8% of GDP. Undocumented labor. In the construction sector, which is a huge 5.5% of the economy, undocumented immigrants take up 12.7%. In hospitality, there's 1 million undocumented workers in hospitality, which is about 7.7% of the hospitality sector. 22% of all cooks. I mean, they do make good food. And obviously they're heavily exploited. Trillions of dollars are being made off the back of these people, and they're paid nothing. You create a class which is disorganized, which is unorganized, which is afraid to say anything, which is afraid to organize itself or to talk back, or to do anything that the boss would be dissatisfied, and they would accept more or less any conditions. Again, as you said, and that they are used against the rest of the working class.
Exactly. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting is, as you said, legal documented immigrants massively swung towards Trump in these elections. It was the group that swung the most, in fact. But for instance, in California, documented immigrants make up 40% of the construction sector. So surely, who are they competing with? Who are their closest? It's people who are coming in an undocumented manner, working for far less wages and much. And they think, oh well, if we get rid of these guys, that's what they're told at least. It's not. It's not because we're making super profits. It's not because we're making trillions of dollars. It's because of these guys. You can see we can't do anything. It's just the laws of the market. It is the law of the market, and that's why obviously the market has to be abolished. But the point is, the capitalists need these guys, and we need to expose this. And finally, I would say this question of insecurity. Every day you look at the papers. Every day there's this immigrant or this person here in Britain or anywhere you go in the West killed this person or raped someone or assaulted someone, and knife crime. And you talk to people and they feel, knife crime is on the rise. I don't even actually think it is at the moment, but that is the image that's created. And first of all, I think that's an absolutely false image. Created to what? To create a mood of insecurity, to create a mood that we're surrounded, we need the state, we need the bourgeois, we need the capitalist class. But also, I always think you sanction some guy, let's say, cheats in Social Security just to get a couple of £100 a month more, just to survive. He's not living a life of luxury. And then you have these big banks and monopolies not paying any tax, dodging trillions of dollars worth of tax. Who is the real criminal? Who are the real thieves? They're stealing and they're committing burglary. You had United Health, the health insurance agency, all of these health insurance companies. How many people are they responsible for killing?
Yes, that's right.
How many people are the politicians, the warmongers, the supporters of the war in Ukraine, the supporters of the war in Israel? Wall Street, how much have they stolen, right? And that just reminds me of there was a Batman movie. You remember there was a bad guy? I can't remember. Bane was his name. He breaks into Wall Street and some guy says, "There's nothing to steal here." And then he says, "What are you doing here then?" That's all they're doing. They're stealing and looting and plundering and exploiting the hard labor of the working class. Those are the real people who make society insecure. And those are the real criminals and violent assailants of working people. And that is what the unions need to explain. And I think, when you talk to people, there's an idea that it's so difficult because people are so racist and they have so many prejudices. But I think this is so superficial. You remember when Corbyn rose in the Labour Party, and back then you had UKIP in Britain, which was a kind of anti-immigrant, anti-EU organization. And as soon as Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party, UKIP collapsed in the polls. Why? Because he was putting forward a class position. There was no anti-immigration there. No one needed that. It's a question of who talks to the class position. And if the union leaders did this, they would be they would cut across all of this in an instant. And bridge that gap which is being created right now, and that both the Democrats and Republicans are feeding into.
But instead of that, you have trade union leaders in the United States. Some of them support Trump and his tariff policies, i.e., giving credence to the idea that in reality the enemies of the U.S. auto workers is the Mexican auto workers, not the big bosses of the auto companies. And then you have another layer of trade union leaders, equally corrupt and bureaucratic, who support the Democrats, i.e. the idea that, well, if we elect a different capitalist party, they will defend the interest of working people. How does that make any sense at all? So I'd say that. The conclusion this movement started obviously in Los Angeles, but now there's been big demonstrations and protests in other parts, in New York, in Chicago, in obviously in Texas, and where there's big immigrant communities and so on. But and this is very good. It's the beginning of a reaction, and it's good that people get organized to resist these migration rates and so on. But at the end of the day, what we need is a political program. That puts forward the independence of the working class, the defense of the interest of the working class, outside, separate, and in opposition to the interest of the two capitalist parties in the United States. There is this call for demonstrations. I think it's this weekend or today. I'm not totally sure. There's an organization or kind of a network. It's called No Kings. It's against Trump. But this is run by the Democrats, right? They're trying to, as usual, to capitalize, to channel the discontent of the people back into the safe channels of saying, oh, we need to elect the Democrats. And
like Trump is doing.
As if, the Democrats have been in power already. It's the disastrous policies of Biden at home and abroad that made people vote for Trump as a protest vote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that this is the most important thing to get out of this movement in the United States is the need for a class independent position, for a party of the working class with a revolutionary program. To point out that the problem is not migrant workers or undocumented workers, that the problem is not this group or that other group that being scapegoated. The problem is the capitalist system as a whole, which is in crisis and needs to be overthrown. If a program like that was put clearly, I think it will have massive support.
In a socialist society, someone always tells me, you guys need to say what you guys want, not just what you're against. Let's say in a socialist society, in a planned economy, what would migration, first of all, you wouldn't have that level of migration as you, every year now we're hitting records in international and domestic migration in the world because of all the wars, the economic insecurity and so on. You wouldn't have that. People wouldn't be uprooted like that. But also it wouldn't be a problem absorbing new workers. New workers come to one area, it just mean more people to do the necessary work. A planned economy can easily absorb new workers without any anything having to be shifted around. In fact, quite to the contrary, it would be a resource. It would add to the with the new insights and new angles and new just physical resources to the production and the development of that particular area. So in that sense, it wouldn't be a problem. Immigration is a problem under capitalism because of the way that the system is run for profit. If you agree, we can continue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah? Let's move on.
The last segment, maybe make it a bit brief. Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Brothers. No, not brothers. Brothers again, maybe. I love you. He loves me. He loves me not.
Yeah, bring out the popcorn. That's what I say.
These guys, this was the dynamic duo of the Trump election, and they were on Twitter and Truth Social and everywhere. Very, very chummy. And they've fallen out in the past couple of weeks. They've been attacking each other.
Viciously.
Elon Musk said, I have to say something now. This budget, the big, beautiful bill that we talked about is a disgrace or something to that effect. And then there's been a back and forth between the two.
An escalation of accusations.
Massive escalation.
Even at one point, Elon Musk was talking about launching his own political party against Trump.
And he's been insinuating that he might, who wants money for their political campaigns in the midterms that are coming up in an attempt to try to poach Republican people to go against Trump. He paid $300 million towards Trump's election campaign last year. And
that's democracy, isn't it? If you have money, you can buy a few politicians.
Yeah, you can buy the president, you can buy a congressman, or you can attempt to. I think in the end, Trump is probably more powerful than Musk because he's more popular. So he won. But just let's stop with that. I mean, the fact that an individual has that kind of power, controls Twitter, which is a major news source, has all of this money that is throwing around, and this is not just Elon Musk. I mean, the whole of the bourgeoisie. Musk is just stupid enough to be very vocal about it. Old money stays in the background, channels their money with more refinement and finesse, and without being seen, because now everyone obviously hates him and his company is tanking. But that tells you something about the world that we live in. There's no democracy. And then Trump insinuated, it was said that, well, maybe we shouldn't renew his public contracts. Another couple of questions come to the mind. This is supposed to be private entrepreneurship, but in reality, a huge part of Tesla's profits are coming from state subsidies. They're now cutting state subsidies to EV cars. But for years, when Tesla was not profitable, they got billions of dollars of subsidies to help. They couldn't.
They always tell us, don't they, that the point is that the capitalists should keep their profits because they're risking the capital. But in fact, they're not risking the capital. And whenever it happens that capitalists go under, a business goes bankrupt or a bank, then they get bailed out with public money. Public money means from our own pockets. I mean, because people who pay tax is working class people. I mean,
I think there's always been my hypothesis. Elon Musk's whole operation is to suck money out of public coffers. That's what he does. One, with Tesla, that's how he that is a huge part of, or a big part of the development of Tesla. Then you have SpaceX, which is now the primary vehicle to flying people to the International Space Station from on America's behalf, which is quite insane, isn't it? That one individual controls this amount, but gets billions of dollars worth of payments, subsidies and payments every single year. Then he's got Starlink, which we know is used in Ukraine and other places, and the Italian state government
is discussing it. Yeah,
he was looking into these railway. What's it called? The Boeing company he had, which was trying to create these vacuum sealed railway connections between major cities of trains that could go really. I forgot the name of it now. Yeah. Again, this can only be done with public funding. This is not something the private. Anyway, but this just shows that the as you say, the true nature of private entrepreneurship in reality is all subsidized by the state. And also, why should one individual have that much power? Why should one individual basically be in charge of the space program, all of the important parts of it? Surely that. First of all, Elon Musk didn't develop SpaceX alone. He had thousands of engineers and workers who did the work for him. That company should be publicly owned. Yeah. All of the other stuff. But obviously, the main reason is that there's a division. There's a conflict of interest here and a conflict of opinion. Musk is more libertarian. He believes in no state or very little state, in slashing, cutting.
No regulation
whatsoever. And that's what he was trying to do in Doge. In the end, he didn't really succeed in anything. He was saying, $1 trillion or $2 trillion. Yeah. If you really are generous, he might have saved 100 billion. But probably not even that. And then there's the budget, which the new budget, the big beautiful bill, could cost them, in the best case scenario, would cost an additional $2.4 trillion to be laid on top of the American debt, which is $34 trillion. This is 12 zeros. Yeah. And Musk believed that should have been cut down severely. Trump, I don't think he has any moral reasons not to do that. He wouldn't care one way or the other.
Actually, he's said for a long time, he's very worried about the debt and the debt must be brought down, but he has a little problem.
What's his problem?
The problem is that he's promised all these things. His political support comes from a lot of working class people voting against the establishment. He's promised all these things. America will be great again. There'll be jobs. We'll bring down inflation, the price of eggs and stuff like that. And you cannot, in a period of crisis of capitalism, you cannot carry out a policy that benefits your billionaire friends with tax cuts that he wants to maintain, at the same time as you maintain the social programs which benefit working class people, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. So he's trying to balance, he's walking a tightrope, which is very, very difficult to maintain the balance. Yeah. So what we're saying basically is that behind the Elon Musk-Trump split, which now might be a reconciliation.
Yes, because now he's withdrawn some of his tweets.
His tweets, yeah. But anyway, behind this, there is a division, right? It reflects a real division, which is that Trump was brought to power through an uneasy coalition, which cannot be maintained in the long term, of working class people who've been promised better conditions, a return to the good old days of well-paid jobs, no inflation, and so on. And his billionaire friends who've been promised tax cut. And you cannot have the two things at the same time. Particularly, you cannot have the two things at the same time in a period of capitalist crisis. If the US economy was growing, say 5-7% a year, as it was in the period after World War II, then some compromises might be possible, but now it's not possible. And Elon Musk is getting frustrated because he would like to introduce more cuts in spending and cut the state expenditure to the bone, But obviously, Trump, who wouldn't mind doing that, but he's worried about his own political career and how is he gonna maintain the support of working class people who voted for him. So there's a
Midterm
contradiction.
elections are
Yes,
coming up. If the
exactly.
bill had gone through with massive, what we're talking about is 2.4 trillion. And even more, because that's just how the amount of new debt that's taken on. So if they want to actually reduce the debt, they need to cut way more than that. That would be a frontal attack against the American working class. And if anything, I mean, he would probably end up with an uprising in his hands. And if not, there's elections a year and a half from now, which would definitely be affected by this. We saw in the Labour Party recently withdrew some of the cuts to winter fuel, some of the the most vicious parts of the vicious cuts that they made against old people and disabled people in particular. They reversed some of this, revealing the dilemma they're in. In France, you had
not because they changed policy, but because they worried about the election results.
Precisely because they can see that they're collapsing in the polls. Reform has now overtaken Labour consistently in poll after poll. We saw in the local elections, the Reform massively outperformed Labour and the Tories. In France, you had the government collapsing because they couldn't pass a budget of cuts. And yet they had to push these things through. But
why? I mean, this is the important thing. Why did the government collapse in France? Because there is now a very stark contradiction between the real needs of the capitalist class from the point of view of cutting the budget in a time of capitalist crisis and so on, and the electoral prospects of any government that carries out those policies. They're going to be massacred at the polls, and obviously politicians also are interested in their own position.
I mean, the cuts that the Labour Party did again were only excess the part of interest payments that they hadn't calculated or something like that. Anyway, it was nowhere even near paying seriously paying off the actual debt. There is a perfect storm coming because you've seen years of piling up of debt as a means for the bourgeois to overcome their crises. In COVID, they took another pile. Trump himself added $5 trillion to the debt. Back then, interest rates were around just below 1%, around zero, more or less 0%.
In Europe, it was negative interest rates.
Now they're around 4%. So that's more than a quadrupling of the interest rates. Another thing that's happening is obviously the world economy is grinding to a halt, which means that prospects for the governments becoming dimmer. Less people, financial institutions and fund managers are willing to buy bonds, i.e., that is to
finance the
debt. There's also a huge part of this debt. I'm not sure quite how much. I think it's about 40% of the OECD's recent debt has to be refinanced in the next 3 years. So we're talking.
Yes, because these are like 5 or 10 year treasury government bonds that were taken at the time of the pandemic, for instance.
And they have to be paid back now, but they don't have the money, so they have to take new loans to pay back their loans. And what's happening is that the market is being flooded with bonds. So a lot of these finance capitalists see, well, this is a flooded market. I can squeeze them. And another thing, the Financial Times had a very interesting long read called The Mounting Pressure on the Bond Market. It explains all of these things. The Japanese state, which Japan has been the kind of standard bearer of bond safety. So everyone was looking to Japanese bonds as the top standard. They couldn't sell all of their bonds in a recent round that they had. American bond sales have been squeezed, i.e. interest rates have gone up because of the instability that Trump is causing. And so it's like a perfect storm coming. And at a time where the world economy is grinding to a halt And one thing that this article says, I wanted to read it because this is the key thing. Because they talk about when are they going to default on this debt? Are they going to collapse? Are we going to see, there's a talk of all these dramatic scenarios. And this guy at the end of this article says, actually, that's not the main concern. His name is Bill Campbell. He's a fund manager at Double Line Capital. He says, what I'm really concerned about is that you end up in a fiscal dominance story. You can't get rid of this debt, and the debt comes to dominate everything. He says, where increased government borrowing and spending crowds out private investment. He warns that this could lead to a permanently lower growth trajectory, a long-term malaise of lower growth, and a massive debt overhang. He said, this is a mountain that's going to pile up. This is going to suck up so much of the national resources, the wealth that the working class produces every year. A huge chunk of it is just going to go into this black hole of interest rates, which means what? Which means less investments, starting from the public coffers, but then in other, but also privately. There's also private debt. Less investments, less development, declining infrastructure, declining productivity, a deepening of in other words, the potential of a long drawn out depression. That is what this debt really could.
And if you go back, in fact, you need to ask yourself, where is this debt coming from, right? And you can see that both in 2008, when the big crisis, and in 2020, when the COVID pandemic, governments in the Western countries mainly, but around the world, they used a massive amount of money. They went into debt in order to first bail out the banks, and second, in order to prevent a social explosion at the time of COVID, when people were forced to stay home and so on. In order to save the system, right? In order to prevent a social explosion, they use this massive amount of money. But now this massive amount of money has become a massive mountain of debt, which is like an albatross on the neck of the capitalist system, prevents any real growth. Actually, I think that today, the combined household, corporate, and state debt around the world is 330%, over 330% of the world's GDP. This means that everything that's produced in the world in goods and services in 1 year, debt represents 3 times that. And that prevents the development of the capital. Now, if you were in a period of sustained growth of the economy, then the debt will progressively become less. But now it becomes progressively more because there's no growth. And there's no growth because there's a lot of debt. Because, like, for instance, if the families are indebted, they are less likely to, buy a car or buy a new house. If the companies are indebted, they are less likely to invest. And they are less likely to invest because people have no money to consume. So, I mean, it's... For a period of time, the increase in debt allows the capitalist system to go beyond its limits, but it reaches a certain point, and we're reaching that point now.
It's becoming the opposite.
Where it becomes the opposite. It really squeezes the whole of the economy and provokes an even bigger crisis. But this is what Marx said in the Communist Manifesto. They said the capitalist system overcomes its crisis by preparing the terrain for deeper and more severe crisis. This is what we see now.
Exactly. And I would say this, again, if we have to take it back, what would the communists do? We see now increasing activism, they call it, by financial institutions and funds and so on, which means what? They put demands on governments for cuts as a precondition for buying their bonds. These people have been making tons of money. They've made all of this money many times.
Just by speculating.
They play no productive role whatsoever in society, but they suck up a huge part of the wealth and the which has been produced. The working class doesn't owe them anything. These are the capitalists. And what should be done is all of these loans should be cancelled and the financial institutions nationalized,
repudiated,
expropriated,
debt
repudiated, And then whatever is left in the banks should be spent on investing in society, investing in developing, not investing in speculating and putting away their money. You know, this, they're talking about, oh, there's not enough money for immigrants, there's not enough money for healthcare, there's trillions of dollars stashed away in the accounts of the hedge funds, in the accounts of the big multinationals, in the accounts of the major corporations on a world scale. All of that is wealth created not by the bosses, not by the capitalists, but by the working class.
Yes.
And those are the people's.
And the system has become so parasitical that when interest rates were very low, it was very cheap to get money. The companies will get money and use it not to invest in productive investment, use it to buy their own shares on the stock exchange, so the valuation will go up. This is
so you
madness.
forget one other thing, because before they did that, they would get, the bosses of the companies would get stock options.
Massive, yeah.
So they would use loans to push up the prices. Yeah. Then they would cash in their stock options, and they would make tons of money. Yeah. This is we're definitely going to do a show about this, because there's lots of material that we have about zombie companies and how how a huge part of the system actually has become addicted to this cheap credit that was once there, and now all of those are also threatening to go bankrupt. I think that's what I had. Do you have any final remarks?
That's fine.
It was a great show. Thank you everyone for listening, for tuning in. Just one last thing. I really want to thank everyone who supported us last week by watching the show to the finish, by sending the show to as many people as they could, and in particular by liking, subscribing, and commenting on the show on YouTube. This really helped boost our reach. We really want to encourage you to do the same again if you can. Right, I would say in particular, what's really interesting is questions. If you can write questions in the YouTube chat and or answer other people's questions, to have there are actually quite good political discussions going on there. And again, because the questions also help us gauge what's actually going on. For instance, this question of LA. I mean, we were probably gonna do it anyway, but one of our viewers mentioned this in a post and so obviously we understood that this is an important thing that people think about, people want answers to. So please keep doing that to help expand our reach and bring a communist and Marxist analysis to wider layers. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. This was Against the Stream. We'll see you again next Thursday, 6 p.m. Thank you very much.